Chicago caught on camera. This young couple had just been celebrating the Puerto Rican Day Parade when a group ambushed them in their car after a dispute over a minor traffic accident. Police say the husband was shot and killed, almost execution style, in their words. His wife critically wounded. Joe Gamaldi, now National Vice President of the Fraternal Order of Police. Joe, you and I have done a couple of police specials. We've been talking about this for over a year. Have we gotten to that point that you warned us about where you wouldn't have enough police who wanted to do the job to keep us all safe?
Yeah, Harris, thank you for having me on. We've absolutely reached that point. We sat down and talked about this back in 2019, and we said if the anti-police sentiment continued the way it was going, and that if we continued to have rogue prosecutors and activist judges continuing to let violent criminals back out on these streets, that we were going to see huge increases in violent crime. And that's exactly what's happening on our streets right now. We've seen the murder rate in New York go up by 48%, in Philadelphia 66%, in Minneapolis 236%, Portland 137%, and you just talked about the disturbing video in Chicago where that man was executed in the streets. This is happening every single day in our urban communities, and it's real easy for me to sit here and talk about statistics, but those are people. Right. Those are fathers, those are mothers, those are sons and daughters that are being murdered in our streets, and we don't have the support from our politicians in those communities.
Well, look, you listed cities there, and I'm going to get to Portland, Oregon here next, that we're already seeing devolving situations. And when you talk about the defund movement, what does it do? What's the reality of that? Not the politics of it, Joe. What's it like on the ground?
Well, you know, I'm really going to break it down for folks. When they talk about defunding the police, what you're really talking about is an increase in violent crime for our urban communities, because that's exactly what happened. And you know who's impacted the most by that? Statistically, it's our black and brown communities. They're the ones that are being murdered in our streets, and we don't have enough people that want to talk about this. I mean, for goodness sake, we have mayoral candidates in New York where the violent crime rate is through the roof, still calling to defund the police,
yes,
thinking that this is going to be some sort of solution. They're charlatans, and they're selling snake oil to the public. And let me tell you something, Harris. The American police officer, we can fix this. We can get violent crime under control, but we need to embrace the rule of law. We need to make sure we prosecute violent crime, embrace the broken window theories. We delivered historic crime reductions over the last 20 years in our urban communities, which led to a renaissance there, and we can do it again. But we need the funding, and we need the support.
And, Joe, I don't know if you heard from our reporter, Aisha Hosni, but she talked with the former mayor, Rudy Giuliani, and he said, look, if you don't get this under control in a year, you'll have 30 years of what we're seeing now. It takes that long. You have a very short window, a tipping point that you have to avoid before you go forward and this much farther. I want to get to this. Portland, Oregon Police Association's executive director had this to say following the resignation of all 50 officers in the city's elite riot response team. Watch.
Morale is as bad as it's ever been before. We're dealing with rioting at a level and a sustained violence that we've never seen before. We're looking at violence in our city, gun violence in our city like we've never seen before. We're looking at the most catastrophic staffing levels we've ever seen before. We're looking at budget cuts to defund us like we've never seen before. All those things play into the morale of a police officer coming to work every day, trying to do your job, trying to do it right with all these roadblocks in your way.
Joe, FOP Vice President, I know that half your job is listening. The other half is trying to solve all the problems that you hear. What are you hearing?
You know what I'm hearing, and what I'm hearing from every single police officer on the streets right now, is that morale has never been this bad in the 16 years I've been a police officer. Officers are desperate for people to come out and support them. And we need people, just regular folks in our community, to step up and say they don't want violence in these streets. Stop giving your voice to the activists that show up at city council and scream and yell. We need to touch the real people in our community to understand that they don't want violent crime. And we need to make sure that politicians hear our message loud and clear. We, as the American law enforcement officer, can fix the problems in this country with crime, but you need to support us, and you need to stop calling us murderers at every turn.
Yeah, you mentioned the mayoral primary that's going on. Maya Wiley is one of those candidates who's talking about, you know, continuing with the defund. You have the ex-cop Eric Adams. putting word out, what he wants to do that's completely opposite. And you have another ingredient, Joe, just to bring in a little bit of politics here. Aisha told us yesterday about this, that Republicans are changing their registration to be able to vote in this primary to try to get the field down to a more moderate, so that they can get away from all the things that are spiking the crime, that are part of the problem. The root causes, as the Biden administration would like to point out. Let's move on. The White House, speaking of which, is giving us an idea of what to expect today when President Biden addresses the nationwide rise in crime tomorrow, suggesting he does not feel violent protests or the defund the police movement are to blame. Let's watch.
The president feels a great deal of the crime we're seeing as a result of gun violence. You can expect he'll speak to that and his commitment to continuing to address gun violence and gun safety in the country, conveying to the American people what he's going to do now to help address the rising crime we've seen over the last year and a half.
Look, Joe, you get into politics sometimes, too, because you have to talk to city leaders. What would you say to the president of the United States as he's about to talk about the violent crime? And remember, he didn't talk about it in the run-up to the election. He avoided that. But now he can't. It's touching Democrats. What would you say?
Well, I certainly hope as a part of his comments, he's going to call out rogue prosecutors and activist judges, because everybody wants to talk about new gun laws. Well, the fact of the matter is we're not even enforcing the gun laws we have now. We're allowing violent gun-toting gang members to shoot people and then get probation or get a PR bond after they're already out on 8 felony bonds. So if we want to talk about what's driving violent crime, let's talk about the individuals who are committing these crimes. Let's talk about throwing the book at them and restoring the rule of law. That's how we're going to get there, not by creating a whole host of new laws that nobody's going to enforce anyway.
Wow. Former member of Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force. Remember that? Well, Brittany Packnett Cunningham is blaming the police for the rise in crime.
This rising crime is not the fault of the movement. It's actually the fault of the police. Why should we keep funding systems and institutions that keep rendering themselves ineffective? This rising crime is not the fault of the movement. It's actually the fault of the police, and this has been our point all along. We should be talking about gun control, livable wages, fair housing, education. That's where we should be moving the money to ensure truly safe streets.
I don't know if you can have a conversation about wages and education with a gang member, but Joe, what would you say to her?
I'd say what she said is completely ridiculous. And I think it's just a part of gaslighting the American public. Let's tell folks, hey, don't believe your lying eyes. It's certainly not the police officers' fault that these crimes are completely out of control as we let people out over and over again. I mean, we just had in New York City where they let 200 or several hundred looters and rioters, and they let them go scot-free and didn't even enforce the crime. What kind of message is that sending to an entire generation of people? But you know what? It's much easier to just blame the police than come up with real solutions to problems that we're having in our communities. And I would suggest that individual, why don't you go out there and actually talk to people out on the streets, talk to business owners, talk to mothers and fathers who have lost their sons and daughters to violent crime, and then come talk to me blaming the police, because we're the ones that are in that community, and frankly, we're some of the only ones that care.
Yeah, no doubt. Or she could just volunteer to join the force and try and fight crime.
And come do a ride-along, open invitation.
An open invitation. You got it. Let's do it. You and I need to do another police town hall and get people to talk about this, because we need to hear it. Joe Gamaldi, always great to have you on the program. Get that first on-the-ground perspective. Thank you.